Life with Liliana and Friends.
Bulavinaka, and welcome to Life with Liliana and Friends. We are in part 2 of a discussion that we've been having with Rosi. Rosi and Jim moved to New Zealand, Christchurch, New Zealand, about 7 years ago. This is their 7th year. And so she's been talking to us about that journey. Welcome back, Rosi.
Thank you, Liliana. Bulavinaka to you all, the viewers listening in tonight.
You know, I'm just thinking about your story, right? And one of the differences compared to the other guests that we've had is that you moved across with your kids, whereas the other ones, like my brother, spoke about his journey, but he has his children, had his children there. I'm really interested to know what it was like in the early days when you moved over and the transition, and talk us through what that was like for your family.
When we moved over, we had come, like my husband, Jim, had come first. We came together and I went back. Then I came in December and the 2 children came over in February 2016. So we've got a blended family. So Jim has 2 children, I have 1. Mine is the youngest girl and Jim has the older girl and boy. But it was only the younger 2 that came with us. And our early days were quite tough. We were in a foreign land. We did not have the support that we have in Fiji. Nobody to come and maybe our children if we are working long hours, or if we've got things to do on the weekend, there's nowhere we can just put our children. If our children are under 13, they cannot be left alone here. So the older boy was 13, but the younger girl was 9. So we just had to ask our children to stay together all the time. As soon as the boy finishes school, he has to pick up the girl and they go home together. And it was quite a struggle for all of us. The weather, our first winter, we really struggled. People are saying, wear merino, get puffer jackets. No, none of that worked for us. It took us a few years to actually adjust. And because we were saving so much money, we didn't have money for anything else. So we really needed our children to sort of walk with us on that journey and be obedient, do what they needed to do. And it wasn't only until after 2 years had passed, where the children, I think it was sort of like after the honeymoon stage, and then they were beginning to miss Fiji. They miss family, they miss the food, and they kept on asking to go back. And eventually, it became so troublesome that we allowed them to go back, and they both went back in 2019.
So when they went back, they didn't stay there, did they? Or how long did they stay? That's an interesting twist to this whole journey. What happened when they came back to Fiji, and did they return?
They did return, and their expectation was quite different from reality. So in their minds, they were wanting to return to the Fiji that they left behind. And we really had fun times talking to them on the phone. The boy's uniform got missing first 2 weeks of school because he went to play rugby and left his uniform on the edge of the playground. And after the game, his uniform wasn't there. And here in New Zealand, nobody will take your uniform. It'll stay there, right. Even your school bag or your phones. But, his mindset had changed, but he didn't realize that that's exactly the Fiji that he had left behind. Yeah. And just making plans to meet with friends, and they planned to meet at 7. And he's there at 6:45. And nobody turns up for 2 hours.
Fiji time.
Yes. And they quickly realized that it wasn't what they had expected. And the girl spent only 3 months in Fiji and she decided to come back. But the boy stayed for 9 months. And then he eventually decided to come back. And once they came back here, it was still difficult for them because they felt like they were hanging in between. They didn't really fit into the community here and didn't find friends that was sort of like the friends they had in Fiji. And they just missed family and friends in Fiji and the food and just life in general.
Yes, I see. And now it's interesting, in hindsight, you would probably, if you knew this, you'd probably think of things that you could better prepare them with before you came. But then also you didn't know yourself. What was your experience like? Is there anything that shocked you when you came, aside from the cold and missing family?
I sort of went through what my children went through, but for me, it was the first 2 years of arriving. Right. I was just very, very homesick. I just disliked everything. It was too cold for me, and I just wanted to go back. But we came over in 2017. That was after being here for one or 2 years. And when even speaking to my family, I realized that there was a gap in their lives that I had missed out on. There were children and I have no idea who they are, and they're talking about people and I don't know them. It felt like I didn't fit into their lives anymore. And when I came back and I realized that, oh, I'm coming home now. And interestingly, on that trip that we came over, it was for 14 days. And 3 of those days were over 31 degrees in Fiji. We were barely surviving. It was too hot. It was sweating. And when we came back, it was cold and it was 15 degrees here in Christchurch, and it felt like heaven. And even the food tasted different. It was too salty, or it was too this or too that. Our taste bud just couldn't take it anymore. So when we came back, I felt like I was coming home. Jim and I felt the same. But it was probably that trip where the children realized that they wanted to go back. Just going for a holiday wasn't enough for them.
Yes, man, you've really articulated those details really well. Thank you for that. And I hope for any viewers that are listening, if you are new to a place and you're feeling the same thing, I hope this gives you assurance that it's okay, because that's part of the process. But we're going to take a quick break now, and we'll come back and talk about some more of these challenges. I'll see you shortly.
Life with Liliana and Friends. Life with Liliana and Friends.
Welcome back to Life with Liliana and Friends. We're speaking with Rosi Rabuku, who is in Christchurch in New Zealand. So, Rosi, you mentioned earlier that when you left your work to care for your daughter who was suffering from depression, it's just, and now that you've explained just prior to the break, the transition and what was happening there, it makes a lot of sense, like how much this could be a lot for, a teenager or young adult to deal with. Would you mind just talking us through that experience with your daughter as a family?
Yes. So during the lockdown, my daughter she really missed, having friends. So she's quite the social person. And it just sort of, built itself up into depression and anxiety. So when life sort of went back to normal after the lockdown here in New Zealand, she had started school again, but she wasn't the same person anymore. She was just feeling sad and all of that. So it led up to she had to go to hospital. She was always being taken to the hospital from school or taken to the school counselor. So I had to leave work regularly just to catch up with them at the hospital, go to the counselor or whatever else she had gotten involved in the school. And that was the main reason why I had to leave work, because I thought that like working full-time and trying to handle this was too much. But when I left work, I could spend more time with her, and I found it really helpful because we had to go to counseling together. The counseling sessions were actually family counseling. So when we came to the counselor, she would have her 15-minute first. The counselor would have it with my daughter. Then the counselor would have it with Jim and I. The counseling for us was how to recognize the signs, how to recognize the signs and how to sort of combat the problem. And it was quite a learning journey for us because as Fijian parents, it's like I say you do to the children.
Right.
But we had to really, really change our mindset. And we learned so many things from it. And one of the biggest lessons I learned is instead of instead of the fight or flight reactions, we can also freeze, choose to do nothing, choose not to react at all. And another thing was just learning to cope with growing children, teenage children, when they are throwing tantrums or just like she has her episodes where she's just crying and she doesn't need help. She's just sort of letting her emotions out. And we had to learn that we shouldn't go in and like try and solve a problem. What's wrong? Who is it? What is it? No, we had to just go and sit down, sit beside her, let her cry it out. If she has a boxing bag in her room. So if she's punching up the boxing bag, just sit there. As long as she looks and she sees us and knows that we are there. So as a family, we had to all go through counseling and it really taught us how to manage growing children in this day and age. It was more about communication than a one-way street type of communication.
I can imagine as parents, it must have been quite a journey in humility. Because like you said, we were not brought up with that kind of parenting. All we know is like I say, you do, like you mentioned. So you two, you and your husband would have gone through quite a personal journey yourselves. Can I just ask, is there any, you spoke about some lessons, but what about you as an individual throughout that process? What is something that you learned from there that you now practice? Is there anything you can think of in your everyday or in your work? Is there a skill that you acquired through this?
Actually, something big that I learned was I learned to identify that I was quite a controlling person.
Wow.
Right up to the minute detail. So, and I expect all my family to go along with that. Like our plans has to happen according to what I've planned, according to the timing and according to the money. And when like all through our life in 2020, when I just had to concentrate on my daughter, I couldn't be controlling anymore where things, concerning our finances and all of that. And I found it really peaceful. And for us, because that was our main plan that got us to New Zealand, was so that Jim would have a good job. He would make decisions for our family. And what happened in our family sort of just put me in my place. For me as a mother, as a wife, to accept, to even accept my husband as the head of the family, to be the person who makes the decision. It all fell into place for me. And it has given me such a calm life now. I know that, okay, this is what I worry about, while that is someone else's.
Yes. Wait, that's a powerful.
Rosi, like it sounds like that really changed almost everything. Like not only for you, but for the household and your dynamic as husband and wife as well. Yes, thank you for sharing that. So we're going to take another quick break and then we will be back for the last segment of the show. We will see you shortly.
Life with Liliana and Friends. Life with Liliana and Friends.
Welcome back to Life with Liliana and Friends. We're speaking with my dear friend Rosi, who is based in Christchurch, New Zealand. So Rosi, you have given us a summary of your journey. Like we've spoken for 2 episodes, but I feel like there's so much more. So thank you for sharing so honestly and giving us so many insights. I just wanted to ask in this last segment whether you could share with us some key things that you've learned in this journey that you'd like to release so that other people can be encouraged and empowered by that.
Thank you. So when Jim had gotten his work visa in New Zealand and I applied to come and join him, we had been apart for 8 months. And 8 months feels like such a long time. But something that we had learned and through experience, we have noticed that's always a problem with people when one goes first and the other one is still behind. with the children is that we need to always set aside a time to talk. There has to be a certain time in a day where we will call each other as couples. And if we set that time aside, we should always keep to it faithfully. And also, it's always good to let our partner know who's in Fiji what we are doing. Like I'm going out to a party, I'm going to be back at about 12, then I'll call you then. Or, if you don't hear from me, then I'll just call you back tomorrow. Just keeping the other one informed, because once the call starts and it's not being picked up, the conclusions start running. And another point is money. Like we live in Fiji, there's a certain amount of money our family spends on family expenses. And sometimes once one of the couple goes overseas, the family expenses increase just because that person is overseas. But we can keep the expenses same, don't change it, just because the person overseas pays rent weekly, has to pay bus fare or fuel and all of that. And also that in order to, reach your goal, you have to save enough money for the family in Fiji to come over. But if bulk of the pay is going to the family in Fiji, then there's little left to cover for visa fees and all of that. And just the biggest advice I would give is sacrifice. The sacrifice that we can do for just 1 or 2 years, and we will achieve our goal. Then we can live as lavish as we want when the whole family is here and we have achieved residence here in New Zealand. But it's just the initial stages where sacrifice is really important in terms of money, especially. And if partners don't work together, that's why most times families break down, because we did not anticipate the COVID and border closures. And because some people have been here for a number of years, but they just never made the step to bring their families over.
That's great advice, Rosi. And what I'm hearing too is it's especially important for the husband and wife to be on the same page. Little things. And I think when you were talking, I was thinking it's not only just for the sake of communication, but to also safeguard ourselves, because you're living individually apart in 8 months. And we've heard a lot of horror stories about families that ended up not, being taken over, which is very sad. And that's not what we want, because it's supposed to be for the betterment of the family. So that's 3 great things you spoke about: the relationship between husband and wife. You spoke about expenses, to keep a lid on that, because there's a lot of things that need to be paid for, in the setup and the moving across. And then also a sacrifice, because really this is a season. I think we often forget we go through different seasons. So you're going to be sacrificing. And us, sometimes we get so impatient. But it's just for a season. Just one last thing before we end. What can us parents do if we have children, like I have big children, and we want to move overseas? What is some advice you have on how we can prepare our children for that move?
Just keeping them informed along the way. And sometimes we can also give them the choice, on whether they want to come or no. But if they do want to come, like sticking with a plan is really important. Although we can, give as much advice and keep them along the way in terms of informing them about the process, it's really sort of an unexpected turn in our lives, because when they come to New Zealand, it's a different type of life here. The information they give out at schools is very different. We in Fiji, we can hide things from our children, and we can intimidate them to obey us. But here you can't really get away with anything. There's a lot of avenues where teachers, doctors, nurses can find out if we are smacking our children at home. The children are being forced to do things they don't want to do. So although we can do as much as we want, my advice would be to the parents instead to just be open-minded. And like you mentioned, it's always a season. It's a very short time they're at home. And even us, our children are aged 16 and 20, and they've both left home. They've moved 7 hours away from us. That's for this year. So we can never really know how our lives will turn out, but just making sure that they stay safe and they just obey the law. Otherwise, they will really be sent back to Fiji.
You're
And
right.
other than that, it's just being open-minded about what the future will bring us as a family.
That's wonderful. That's such a great way to end off our conversation, Rosi. Just being open-minded, because that will help us adjust and that will help us settle in best to the new environment that we're in. Thank you again so much for making time to speak with me. You've really encouraged us. I just love that attitude of yours. It's such a go-getting attitude. And thank you for being a great mom and a great wife. Thank you for working so hard to just, for your family, but also, whether you know it or not, you are inspiring so many people, Rosi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Liliana.
Well, viewers, thank you for joining that conversation, and I hope you learned so much just as I did. We will be back next week for our last episode in this season of Life with Liliana and Friends, so make sure you do not miss it. I will see you then, 8 p.m. exclusively on my TV on Saturday.
Life with Liliana and Friends.